Hello, and welcome back to Void Whispers. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy the Void Whispers that creep in during the dead of night, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable, dim the lights if you dare, relax your mind, let the outside world fade away. And let's begin. Story 1. Officers Sheldon Dossard and his assistant, Howell, pushed their way through the trees of the stretch forest, walking like two men who had already lost their way, but were too proud to admit it. The forest was so far from the nearest town that it almost felt like it existed outside the real world. There were no streetlights, no houses in the distance, no sound of passing cars, and no warm yellow windows showing signs of normal life. The last natural light they had seen was the sun, and that had faded a long time ago behind the black shape of the trees. Now they only had their flashlights. Even those were dying. The beams shook weakly over tree trunks, wet leaves, broken branches, and patches of mud. Every few minutes, one of the lights would flicker, making the shadows jump and bend like something was moving just outside the circle of light. The batteries were running low, and neither man had brought extra. That was only one mistake in a long line of mistakes. Their commander had been murdered exactly 4 hours ago. At least, that was the word people kept using at the station. Allegedly murdered. Allegedly attacked, allegedly found near the old cabin. Sheldon hated that word. Allegedly, it was the kind of word people used when they were scared to speak plainly. The commander was dead. Everyone knew that. Something had happened in this forest, and now Sheldon and Howell had been sent to find out what. No backup, no proper search team, no dogs, no floodlights. Just two officers, one old gun, and a half-empty night pressing down around them. Howell walked a few steps behind Sheldon, breathing too loudly. His boots kept slipping on wet ground, and every time a branch snapped under his foot, he flinched like someone had fired a shot. Sheldon could hear the nervous swallowing in the man's throat. It got on his nerves. Fear was useful only when it kept you alive. Howell's fear looked like the kind that would get them both killed. You heard what happened here, didn't you? Howell asked. His voice trembled softly, even though he tried to hide it. Sheldon stopped for a second, took one last drag from his cigarette, and let the smoke leave his mouth slowly. The tip glowed orange in the dark. Then he dropped it into the dirt and crushed it under his boot. No, he said. Howell looked around as if the trees might be listening. They call it the Forest of Screams. Sheldon did not turn around. That's so? Every year, Howell said, lowering his voice, exactly on April 1st, police officers are killed here. Not civilians, not hikers, not hunters, police officers. Every year from 1995 until now. Nobody knows how it happens. Nobody knows who does it. People who live near the forest have been complaining for years. They say the police keep telling them to stay inside, lock their doors, and let officers handle the danger. But those same people think the police have been hiding from the truth. Sheldon started walking again. And what truth is that? They think there is a murderer right under everyone's nose, Howell said. They think the department knows more than it says. They think officers keep coming here every April 1st because someone is pulling them back. The woods grew colder as Howell spoke. Sheldon told himself it was only the night air. He told himself Howell was repeating old local stories. The kind people tell when they want to make an ugly place sound cursed. Sheldon did not believe in cursed forests, ghosts, or shadows that hunted cops by the calendar. Still, the date sat badly in his mind. April 1st. His face stayed calm, but his eyes blinked a little too fast. His eyebrows lifted just slightly. He did not want Howell to notice, but Howell did. "See," Howell said. "You've heard something." "Be quiet," Sheldon snapped. "You're talking nonsense." Howell shut his mouth, but his fear did not leave. If anything, it got worse. They continued deeper into the forest. They had no reinforcements, and Sheldon knew how stupid that was. He had said it twice before they left the station, but the order had come down fast and strange. "Check the cabin. Confirm the scene. Find the commander if possible. Do not wait until morning." So here they were. One gun. One full magazine. 2 flashlights near death. Howell had wanted to hold the weapon at first, but Sheldon had refused. Howell was too jumpy. He was the kind of man who might shoot at a squirrel if it ran across his boot. Sheldon was older, calmer, and better trained. Years ago, the others at the station had called him the urban cowboy because he had steady hands and a dead eye. He never missed. At least, that was what they used to say. But that had been a long time ago. Sheldon had not fired his gun since the mid-1990s. He did not like thinking about that either. After a few more miles, the trees thinned enough for them to see the shape of a building ahead. It stood in a small clearing, dark and crooked under the moonless sky. A house. No, not a house. A cabin. It looked dead before they even reached it. There were no colors left in the place. Only old brown wood, gray dust, black windows, and peeling white paint that hung from the walls in cracked layers. It looked like a cemetery pretending to be a home. The roof sagged. The porch leaned. The support beams bent to one side, as if the whole place had been trying to collapse for years, but could not quite finish dying. This was where the commander had been killed. Allegedly, no one was supposed to be here. The cabin had been abandoned for many years. Since then, it had been rotting quietly inside the stretch forest, waiting for men like them to come close enough. "He comes here every year, you know," Howell murmured. Sheldon turned his head slowly. "What the hell are you talking about now?" "The man," Howell said. "The murderer. He comes back here. He always gets away. They call him the shadow in the room. No one has ever managed to catch him." Sheldon stared at Howell for a moment. He was not sure if the man was trying to make the night feel worse, or if Howell really believed every word he was saying. Either way, Sheldon had no patience for it. "And you think we're lucky enough to catch the bastard tonight?" Sheldon asked. Howell looked at the cabin and swallowed. "Honestly, I hope not." They stood at the edge of the clearing and studied the cabin from a distance. The square windows were cracked, like old eyes broken by stones. The darkness inside looked too thick. The paint on the walls had faded and fallen away over the years, leaving bare wood underneath. The porch boards were warped. The brown front door stood slightly open, not wide enough to invite them in, but open enough to suggest someone had gone inside and never bothered to close it. There was no sound from within. No footsteps. No whisper. No movement. Only complete silence. "Take control of yourself," Sheldon said sharply. Howell nodded, though his hands still shook around his flashlight. He forced himself forward and followed Sheldon toward the door. They were only a few steps away when the smell hit them. Both men stopped. It was not the smell of blood. Sheldon knew blood, Blood smelled sharp and metallic, like pennies in the mouth. This was worse. It smelled like rotten fruit, old meat, damp cloth, and something that had died behind a wall. It was as if someone had dragged a decaying body past them and then thrown a rotten apple straight into their faces. Howell gagged and covered his nose. "Come to your senses, for God's sake," Sheldon muttered. He meant Howell again, but this time he understood the man's reaction. The smell was wrong. It did not belong to an empty cabin. It did not belong to any normal crime scene either. Sheldon took another step, then suddenly felt the need to look behind him. It was not a sound that made him turn. It was not movement. It was a feeling, cold and sudden, like someone had placed a hand on the back of his neck. He turned. Bodies stood on the path behind them. They were lined up perfectly, one beside the other, facing the cabin. Their dead eyes stared forward. Their faces were covered in dark scars. Their skin was gray, old and dry. Their hair looked torn from their scalps in uneven clumps. They had no mouths. They had no noses. Those parts had been ripped or smashed away, leaving broken, ugly holes where human features should have been. Their eyes were the worst part. They were pale gray, as if all color had been drained out of them. The bodies did not breathe. They did not sway. They stood upright like someone had placed them there. They all looked the same. Then they began to move toward him. "Howl," Sheldon shouted. "Look, damn it." Howell spun around quickly. "What? What happened?" Sheldon pointed, but his hand froze halfway. There was nothing there. No bodies, no gray eyes, no torn faces. Only trees, weeds, wet grass, and a few rats slipping through the dirt near the edge of the clearing. The bodies had disappeared completely. Sheldon struggled to breathe. His chest tightened, and for one horrible second, he felt like the forest itself had moved inside his lungs. Howell stared at him with a heavy, uneasy look. He no longer seemed only scared of the cabin. Now he seemed scared of Sheldon. "Boss," Howell said carefully. "Did you take the pills?" Sheldon looked at him with a sour, shaky, confused expression. "You need to take the pills," Howell said. Sheldon's jaw tightened. His fingers moved toward the side pocket of his pants. He pulled out a small pill bottle and held it in the weak beam of his flashlight. The label was clear, printed in dark letters. Risperidone below it. Smaller words said it was an antipsychotic medicine used for treatment of schizophrenia. Sheldon hated that label. He hated the way the word looked. He hated the way Howell's eyes flicked toward it. He hated needing the bottle. Most of all, he hated being reminded that there were things inside his own mind he could not always trust. He opened it, shook 2 pills into his palm, tilted his head back, and put them in his mouth. He swallowed quickly, even though his throat was dry. Then he nodded once at Howell and turned back to the cabin door. The smell made him cough. Sheldon pushed the front door open. It moved with a small, dry rustle that seemed too loud in the silence. Their flashlights flickered as they stepped inside, and for a moment it felt less like they were entering a building and more like they were walking into death. Inside, the cabin was still. The air did not move. It was thick and stale, carrying the smell of old wood, dust, and something suffocating. Their flashlights moved slowly across the first room. It was a living room, but nothing about it felt lived in. A single sofa sat in front of a low wooden table. Several chairs stood around it, worn down by years of use and then years of neglect. Dust covered everything like a second skin. On the walls hung old frames with portraits of women. At first, Sheldon thought they were different women. Then he looked more carefully and realized they all looked like the same woman. Each portrait showed the same face, or almost the same face, but everyone was flawed in a strange way. In one painting, the eyes were uneven. In another, the mouth was too wide. In another, half the face seemed blurred, as if the artist had forgotten what a human being looked like while painting it. It made sense in a way. The house had been abandoned for years. Old things looked strange when no one cared for them. Still, Sheldon did not like those portraits. To the left of the living room was the kitchen. Narrow shelves lined the walls, holding faded pottery, dusty jars, and containers filled with things that could no longer be recognized. In the center stood a large white table. Empty plates lay across it. Stained forks rested beside them. A messy pile of yellowed newspapers sat near one corner, their pages curled with age. Sheldon moved his flashlight over them. The year on the papers was 1995. In the corner stood an old refrigerator with its door wide open. The light inside had died long ago. Between the dark shelves lay a dead crow, its wings folded close to its body. Its black feathers seemed to drink in what little light entered the fridge. Other than that, there was nothing. No commander, no sign of a fight, no fresh blood. Just silence. A silence so thick it almost made noise. Then Sheldon's walkie-talkie crackled from his pants pocket. Howell jumped like something had bitten him, nearly hitting his head on the kitchen table. Sheldon felt his heart drop hard into his stomach. Who could it be? Howell whispered. "I don't know," Sheldon said. They looked at each other for a second, both of them trying and failing to look calm. Sheldon pulled the walkie-talkie from his pocket and pressed the button. Static filled the cabin. Then a voice came through. Sheldon, abandon the task immediately. 14, it's B. The voice was wrong. It sounded far away, broken and buried under static. It was familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. The number made Sheldon's skin turn cold. "Who is this?" he asked. The static snapped again. Sheldon abandoned the task immediately. 14, it's B. "Hello?" Sheldon said louder. Sheldon abandoned the task immediately. 14, it's. The last word twisted through the static. Hell, Sheldon stared at the walkie-talkie. 14, 14, 14. Then it came together in his head. 1-4. April 1st. The date. April 1st. The day his wife died. His fingers went numb around the walkie-talkie. Something hot and wild rose through his chest. "What kind of sick prank is this?" he shouted. "I'm going to kill the son of a bitch." He threw the walkie-talkie to the floor and kicked it hard. Once, twice, again and again until the plastic cracked and the voice died under his boot. "Relax, boss," Howell started, but he could not finish. The front door slammed shut behind them. The sound shook the entire cabin. Then the screaming began. It came from behind the door first, then from the walls, then from the windows. Dozens of voices screamed at once, each one different. Some were low and deep. Some were high and thin. Some sounded like men. Some sounded like women. Some sounded like children. Together they formed something terrible, like music made from death, each note cursed with blood from the past. Shapes appeared outside the windows. Bodies, bodies, bodies. They pressed against the cracked glass, their dead gray eyes staring in. Their scarred faces slid into view. Their missing mouths opened anyway, somehow making sound. Their ruined noses were gone, leaving dark holes in the center of their faces. Then their screams became words. Sheldon blood, Sheldon blood, Sheldon blood. Sheldon lost control. He raised the gun and fired. The first shot shattered a window. The second struck one of the bodies in the chest. The third hit another in the face. Howell cried out and crawled under the kitchen table, pulling his arms over his head. Sheldon kept firing. He fired at every sound, every face, every gray eye, every shadow that moved near the glass. His expression changed as he shot. The fear drained from it and left something cold behind. Each shot was clean. Each shot struck exactly where he wanted. Bodies fell away from the windows one by one. Smoke filled the room. His rage burned hotter with every pull of the trigger. It felt almost good to fire. His hands were steady, too steady. He had not fired in years, but his body remembered the movement like it had done it yesterday. You never missed me, huh? The sentence slid through his mind. Sheldon froze for half a second. Who said that? Then the gun clicked. Empty, the magazine was finished. Silence returned as suddenly as it had broken. For a few moments, Sheldon stood in the middle of the cabin with the gun raised, breathing hard. The broken windows stared back at him. There were no bodies outside now. No screams. No gray eyes. Only the black trees. Boss, Howell whispered. Sheldon turned. Howell was still under the kitchen table, shaking. Stop, Howell said. Sheldon stared at him. Boss, stop. Sheldon looked angry, but beneath that anger there was doubt. He lowered the gun slowly. His arm felt heavy now, like all the strength had drained from it. We need to find the commander, Howell said carefully. Remember? He spoke like he was talking to a child. Sheldon blinked. Yes, the commander. That was why they were here. Find the commander. Find the body. Find the truth. Sheldon lowered the empty weapon. Every movement felt stiff and strange, as if his joints were full of rust. The cabin returned to the silence it had held before. Howell crawled out from under the table and stood beside him, still hunched, his eyes moving from wall to wall as if he expected the house itself to blink. We need to find the commander, Howell said again, this time in a lower voice. They moved through the cabin together, but now it felt less like an investigation and more like a performance. Two men pretending they were still on a normal police mission. Pretending there was still a normal answer waiting somewhere in the dark. They checked a small bedroom with a rusted bed frame and a mattress eaten by mold. They checked a bathroom with a cracked mirror and brown stains around the sink. They checked a narrow hallway lined with more portraits of the same woman. In each picture, her face was more damaged than before. One had gray eyes. One had dark scars over her cheeks. One had no mouth. Sheldon looked away. Jesus Christ, what is wrong with me? He thought. They could not return without something. They had to find the commander, whether he was dead in a hidden room, buried under the floorboards, or sitting naked and insane in some basement. They could not abandon the mission. Do not abandon the mission, Sheldon. The words rang inside his head. Then he stopped. The number. 14, April 1st. The date. Who knew about that? Who could possibly know what that day meant to him? His breath caught in his throat. Only one man knew the details. Only one man knew enough to use that date like a weapon. Only one man had heard the story from Sheldon's own mouth years ago, back when Sheldon was drunk, broken, and too tired to keep the memory locked away. Only one man could have said 14 and known exactly where it would cut. The commander. Shit. Sheldon looked down at the gun in his hand. Then his eyes slipped toward the kitchen floor. The pill bottle lay there, near the place where he had been standing earlier. It was closed, completely full. Sheldon stared at it. He had not taken the pills. He had only imagined it. The cold moved up his spine slowly, like fingers crawling under his skin. His face filled with terror. "Oh my God," he whispered. A voice spoke behind him. "Do you think you're a psychopath?" Sheldon turned. Howell stood in the kitchen, watching him. Smoke from the gun still hung in the air between them. "I think you're a bit of a mentally ill motherfucker," Howell said. For a moment, he looked serious. Then his eyes widened, and he began to laugh. It started small, then grew louder and louder. Howell placed one hand on his stomach and threw his head back. His laughter filled the cabin, bouncing off the walls and the cracked windows. It went on too long. It became ugly. It became almost like screaming. "You've always been a funny man, boss," Howell said. Sheldon said nothing. "It's for everyone's good, you know," Howell continued. Sheldon stayed silent. "You need a break from the nightmares," Howell whispered. Then Howell walked to the old refrigerator, reached inside, and took out the dead crow. He threw it at Sheldon's feet. The crow hit the floor with a dry, soft thud and rolled once, its black feathers spreading dust across the boards. "It's dead," Howell said, "just like your wife." Ironic, every word struck Sheldon in the chest. "Sheldon," Howell said softly, "your wife." The room seemed to tilt. Howell picked up one of the old newspapers from the kitchen table and threw it at him. It hit Sheldon's chest and fell open on the floor. The headline stared up at him. April 1st, 1995, Officer Sheldon Dossard accused of murdering his wife. Reality hit him with cruel force. Not slowly. All at once. He remembered the middle of the night. He remembered waking from a nightmare, sweating, shaking, hearing something moving in the house. He remembered his wife running toward him, calling his name. He remembered the gun in his hand. He remembered firing before he understood she was real. The bullet hit her in the head. She dropped to the floor. That should have been the end of it. It should have been the moment he screamed, called for help, and ruined the rest of his life honestly. But that was not what happened. Something inside him broke wide open. He remembered standing above her body and staring at her face. He remembered going to the kitchen and taking a knife. He remembered cutting dark scars across her skin. He remembered opening the toolbox on his desk and taking out a nail. He remembered pushing it into one of her eyes until the color changed from blue to gray. Then the other. He remembered using the knife again, peeling and tearing her skin until she looked less like the woman he had loved, and more like one of the dead things from the path. He remembered taking a hammer. He remembered smashing her nose, her mouth. Again, 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 he remembered screaming one word until his throat burned. Blood, blood, blood. He remembered dragging her body to the wall. He remembered making her stand. Then he remembered swallowing pills until the world went dark. Sheldon staggered back, nearly slipping on broken glass. "No," he said. Howell's smile faded. "Yes, no," Sheldon said again, but the word had no strength. The cabin creaked around them. The portraits on the walls seemed to lean closer. The woman in every frame looked like his wife now. Same eyes, same scars, same missing mouth. The smell of rot became stronger. Howell stepped closer. The commander knew, he said. He knew what you did. He knew you were never cleared. He knew the story was buried because the department didn't want one of its own exposed. He knew the pills only kept the truth quiet for a while. Sheldon shook his head. Where is he? Howell tilted his head. You already know. And then Sheldon remembered. The commander had called him the night before. His voice had been serious, almost gentle. He said old files had been found. He said people were asking questions again. He said Sheldon needed to come with him to the stretch forest. He said the truth had waited long enough. Sheldon remembered the cabin. He remembered the commander standing near the kitchen table. He remembered the commander saying his wife's name. Then he remembered anger. He remembered the gun. He remembered the commander falling. He remembered Howell standing in the doorway, watching everything. Sheldon looked at Howell now. Howell's face had changed. The nervous assistant was gone. The shaking man was gone. What remained was colder, harder, and older than Sheldon had ever noticed. You brought me here, Sheldon whispered. Howell smiled faintly. No, boss, you brought yourself here, same as every year. Outside the cabin, the screaming began again, but this time it was soft. It rose through the trees like wind. Sheldon turned toward the broken windows. Faces appeared in the glass. Gray eyes, scarred cheeks, missing mouths, dead skin. One by one, they gathered outside. And then he saw her. His wife stood among them. She looked exactly like the memory he had tried to bury. Her eyes were gray. Her mouth was gone. Her skin was marked and torn. But somehow, even without a mouth, he knew she was saying his name. Sheldon tried to lift the gun. Howell looked at it and laughed quietly. There are no bullets left. The front door opened by itself. Cold air rushed inside. Beyond the doorway, the stretch forest was full of bodies. They stood in perfect rows between the trees, all facing the cabin, all waiting. The path that had been empty moments before was now crowded with the dead. Howell leaned close to Sheldon's ear. April 1st, he whispered. You deserve to die. Sheldon could not move. The flashlights flickered once, twice, then both lights went out. The last thing Sheldon heard before the darkness closed around him was the forest screaming his name. Story 2. All that could be heard on the ship was the soft creaking of wood as the vessel rose and fell with the waves. The planks groaned gently, expanding and tightening under the pressure of the sea. It was a calm sound, almost peaceful, the kind of sound that could make a tired sailor feel safe if he did not think too deeply about it. But to any man who had spent enough years on the ocean, that sound was also a warning. It was a reminder that the sea was never truly harmless. Even when it was calm, even when it moved softly beneath a clear sky, it held a power no man could understand. The ocean could sleep like a child one moment and wake like an angry god the next. On the deck, only the steersman was awake enough to pay attention to the sky. The rest of the crew had gone below or were stretched out wherever they could find space to rest. The ship moved steadily through the dark water, guided by old skill, habit, and the stars above. The steersman knew those stars well. He had used them for many years to guide ships across open water. He had read them in storm and silence, in heat and cold, in seasons when the heavens seemed as familiar as the lines in his own hands. That was why he noticed something strange, almost at once. There was a pattern above him that he did not know. At first, he thought his eyes were tired. He rubbed them and looked again. The sky was filled with stars, bright and small, scattered across the blackness like salt across dark cloth. But beyond the normal patterns he knew, beyond the constellations sailors trusted like old friends, there was something else. It was not made of stars, exactly. It was made from the darkness between them. The empty spaces seemed to connect, forming a shape that should not have been there. It was a constellation of absence, a design made from pure black void, deeper than the night around it. The steersman stared up at it, confused and uneasy. Then the sound of the ocean disappeared. The waves stopped washing against the hull. The ropes stopped whispering in the wind. The sails stopped moving. The ship itself stopped creaking. Everything that made a ship feel alive on the sea simply vanished at once. The silence was so complete that it seemed to press against his ears. He looked around quickly, his heart suddenly beating hard. In all his years at sea, he had never known the familiar sounds of a ship to simply end. There was always something. Wood, water, wind, men breathing below deck. But now there was nothing. Before he could shout a warning, the silence was broken by a violent crash. The whole ship shook. Wood split somewhere below. Men screamed. Barrels rolled. A mast rope snapped with a sound like a whip. From somewhere in the dark, a sailor cried out, "We've hit something. By God and all that's holy, we've hit something." His voice cut off. Then the silence returned. For a few moments, there was no ship, no men, no sea, no night. Only that terrible quiet. Then the sounds of wind and waves came back as if nothing had happened. Of all the souls aboard that ship, only one was preserved, though preserved was not the same as saved. I woke to the cruel heat of the sun burning into my back. My arms were wrapped around a thin piece of driftwood, and my body floated weakly in the open sea. At first, I did not know where I was. My thoughts were slow and broken, like bits of glass moving inside my skull. My skin felt tight and sore from dried salt. My throat burned so badly that every breath hurt. My lips were cracked. My tongue felt like a piece of leather. The memory of the crash came back in pieces. Darkness, screaming, splintering wood, the ship shaking under my feet, men calling for help. Then, water, cold water, black water, hands reaching, something pulling me down. After that, nothing. I raised my head and looked in every direction. I was desperate to see the shape of a ship on the horizon. I would have cried with joy to see even a sail, even a scrap of smoke, even a bird. Better still would have been land, any land at all. A beach, a rock, a strip of green. But there was nothing. Only water stretching outward forever beneath the white glare of the sun. I searched my clothing for anything useful. My fingers shook as I patted my pockets. All I found was my pocket watch, a pen, and the small notebook I had carried for years. I had filled that notebook with observations, sketches, and notes about the sea. I had written in it almost every day, studying the ocean's moods and mysteries. Now the pages were soaked through, swollen with salt water, and nearly useless. I shouted for help anyway. The cry came out broken and rough. It sounded too small in the open air. I shouted again and again until my throat burned so badly I could not continue. No answer came. No ship appeared. No hand reached out to pull me from the water. I was alone. I had no idea what to do. Should I pick a direction and try to swim? That would use what little strength I had left, and there was no sign of land anywhere. Should I stay with the driftwood and trust the current to carry me somewhere? That felt like surrender, but it was all I had. In the end, I chose to let the sea take me. I kept myself wrapped around the wood and tried not to waste energy. My first problem was simple. How could I stay alive long enough to be rescued or washed ashore? I had no food, no fresh water, no cover from the sun. I knew enough about survival to know how hopeless it was. I could hope for rain. I could watch for fish or sea turtles. I could try to catch something with my bare hands, though I doubted I would have the strength. The thought of fish soon led to a darker thought. I imagined myself not catching them, but becoming food for them. I imagined sharks coming up from below, tearing me apart, turning me into a meal for the same ocean whose secrets I had spent my life trying to understand. That thought stayed with me until exhaustion dragged me under. When I woke again, the sun was sinking below the horizon. The sky had turned orange and purple near the water, while the first stars appeared above. The moon's pale light slowly spread across the sea. I lay on my back, holding the driftwood under my arms, trying not to think about the thirst tearing at my throat. The urge to drink the seawater became almost impossible to resist. I knew it was dangerous. Every sailor knew that drinking seawater only made thirst worse. It dried a man from the inside and drove him mad. But my throat hurt so much. My lips were split. My mouth felt full of dust. I told myself I would take only one tiny sip, just enough to wet my tongue, just enough to feel something other than pain. I cupped my hands and filled them from the ocean. I brought the water to my lips. Then I stopped. It did not smell like seawater. I tasted it, expecting salt, expecting bitterness, expecting death. Instead, it was sweet. I gasped. The water was cool, clear, and sweet as spring water from a forest stream. I did not understand it. I did not care. Before reason could stop me, I began drinking greedily. I drank from my hands, then lowered my face straight to the surface. I drank until my stomach hurt. I laughed and coughed and drank more. The water that should have killed me had become my salvation. Afterward, I slipped from the driftwood and lowered myself into the water. I washed the salt from my body and face. The sweet water touched my cracked skin like mercy. For a little while, I forgot my fear. I forgot the wreck. I forgot the men who had died around me. I floated under the moon and thanked the stars like a madman. Only then did I look up. There, hanging in the sky, was the strange constellation. I did not know it, yet something about it felt familiar. It was made less from the stars themselves and more from the black spaces between them. The darkness seemed to form a shape, and that shape watched over me. I could not place it in any chart. I had never seen it in all my years studying the heavens. Still, I felt as if I had known it all my life. I spent the rest of that night lying on my back, staring up at it, while the sweet water carried me. When the sun rose, the wonder died. The water was salt again. I tasted it carefully and spat it out at once. The ocean had returned to what it should have been. The waves moved around me. The sun climbed higher. The heat came back. My fear returned with it. What had happened during the night was impossible. There was no reason for the sea to become fresh water after sunset, then turn back to salt at dawn. No reason known to science, no reason known to God. And yet it had happened. For 7 days and 7 nights, the pattern repeated. During the day, I suffered beneath the burning sun. My skin blistered. My eyes ached from the light. Every bead of sweat felt like a drop of life leaving my body. The salt water mocked me, glittering all around, endless and useless. I watched the horizon until my vision blurred, hoping for sails, smoke, land, anything. I saw nothing. But each night, when the sun disappeared and the moon rose, the sea changed. The waves became still. The salt vanished. The ocean became that sweet, clean water again. Every night I drank until I could drink no more. Every night I washed my body and let the coolness hold me. Every night the strange constellation stood above, brighter and darker at the same time. At some point, I noticed something else. When that constellation was high in the sky, there was no wind, no waves, no motion. The ocean was no longer an ocean. It was an endless lake, silent and smooth, stretching in every direction under the pale moon. During those nights, this somehow seemed normal to me. It made sense in the way dreams make sense while you are inside them. But during the day, when the sun returned and the sea became salt again, I remembered how wrong it was, and fear settled in my chest like a stone. With every night, the constellation seemed closer. I began to dread sunset, even as I waited for it. I feared the pale light of those unknown stars, but I needed what came with them. Without that water, I would have died by the 3rd day. The thing that frightened me was also the thing keeping me alive. But soon, thirst was no longer my greatest problem. Hunger came. At first, it was a dull ache. Then it became a twisting pain. By the 7th day, it was a creature inside me, clawing at my stomach. I had found no way to catch fish. I saw shadows beneath the water sometimes, but never close enough to grab. I saw no birds, no turtles, nothing I could eat. My strength faded until I could do little more than lie across the driftwood, moving only when night came and the water turned sweet. On the 8th day, the hunger became unbearable. I tried to eat the leather of my shoes. I tore at it with my teeth like an animal, chewing for hours, trying to soften it enough to swallow. It tasted of salt, rot, and old sweat. My jaw hurt. My stomach growled and cramped. After a long time, I gave up and threw the shoe away in tired anger. If I did not find food soon, all the sweet water in this world or any other would not save me. I watched the sun sink that evening with empty eyes. I was too tired to feel joy or fear. I knew what would happen. The impossible constellation would rise. The salt would vanish. The sea would become that still lake again. I would drink. I would live one more night. Then I would suffer another day. Sure enough, the strange dark pattern appeared in the sky. The water changed. I lowered my head and drank slowly. I had no energy left for laughter or thanks. The sweetness entered me, but it did not fill the hollow inside. Nothing could fill that except food. After I drank, a sudden thought came to me. I lowered my face into the water again, this time with my eyes open. There was nothing below. No moonlight reached beneath the surface. No fish moved there. No plants. No drifting pieces of wreckage. Only blackness. Absolute blackness. It was not the normal dark of deep water. It felt solid and endless, as if I were looking into a hole cut through the world. Then an urge took hold of me. I wanted to sink. The feeling was gentle at first, almost peaceful. I wanted to let go of the driftwood and drift down into that liquid dark. I wanted to sink away from the sun, away from hunger, away from pain. I wanted to know how deep the impossible lake went. I wanted to reach the bottom, if there was a bottom. Maybe, I thought, I would drown before hunger could finish me. Maybe that would be easier. I slipped from the driftwood. The water closed over my head. At once, I was swallowed by darkness. It was more than the absence of light. It felt ancient. It felt aware. I tried to keep track of the surface above me, but after only a few seconds, I no longer knew which way was up or down. My body drifted without direction. My lungs tightened. My heart pounded slowly in my ears. Then, a short distance away, lights appeared. Not one light. Several. They glowed orange and red, soft at first, then brighter. I thought they might be lanterns. I thought in my madness that perhaps I had found the remains of my ship. Then the lights moved, and what they showed made me wish I had already drowned. They were eyes. Each one was as large as my torso. The glowing eyes rested on a tongue. The tongue lay inside a mouth so vast that it could have swallowed a galley whole. The jaws stretched wider than any living thing should be able to open. They were lined with yellow teeth of uneven size and shape. Some were long like knives, some were flat like stones, some curved inward like hooks. Beyond them, I could see no end to the throat. It was a tunnel of darkness deeper than the sea itself, and inside that monstrous bulk, bodies floated. Sailors. Countless sailors. They drifted in the creature's throat and belly, untouched by time, their faces frozen in terror. Some wore clothes from ships older than any I had ever seen. Some were bloated. Some were pale and thin. Some still had their mouths open as if their final screams had never ended. They moved slowly around the glowing eyes on the tongue, like dead moons around a living planet. I could not move. I could not scream. A thought crossed my mind, and I knew it was true. The legends were real. Azabeth, the everlasting void. Hunger made flesh. The old stories said that something lived in the waters still. Something older than ships, older than maps, older than the names men gave to the stars. Sailors whispered that Azabeth was not a beast in the sea, but a hunger beneath all seas. A mouth waiting between worlds. I had spent years laughing at those tales. I had studied them only to prove them false. My father had believed them. He vanished at sea when I was young. I had spent my life trying to explain his disappearance with reason. Storm, shipwreck, pirates, illness, anything but the stories he once told me by candlelight. But now, floating before that impossible mouth, I understood why the constellation had felt familiar. My father had drawn it once, not with stars, but with the dark spaces between them. Azabeth's sign. The void between the stars had taken my father. Now, it had come for me. The monster approached. Its jaws began to close slowly, as if it enjoyed my fear. The glowing eyes on its tongue watched me with cold satisfaction. I felt my lungs burning. My body wanted air. My mind wanted death. But something else rose inside me then. Refusal, no. I would not give myself to it. I would not become one more body floating forever in that endless throat. I would not drift among the dead men who had been too weak or too tired or too terrified to resist. I would not become food for the thing that had taken my father. I would survive, no matter the cost. The fear burned away, and in its place came hunger. My lungs felt ready to burst, but I forced a small stream of air from my mouth. The bubbles rose past my face. I followed them. I kicked upward with everything I had left. My arms thrashed. My chest screamed. Behind me, the jaws of Azabeth closed. For one terrible moment, the orange-red eyes glittered in the dark, as if the creature knew I would return. Then its mouth shut, and the lights disappeared. I broke the surface and dragged air into my lungs in painful gasps. I clawed my way back onto the driftwood and held on, shaking. I could not look away from the black water beneath me. I knew what waited below now. I knew what the sweet lake truly was. A mouth, a gate, a trap. I must have fallen asleep still clinging to the wood, because the next thing I remember is the sun waking me. But the sun was wrong. It hung high in the sky, yet it was not bright gold. It was deep red, the color of blood and torn flesh. Worse still, the strange constellation had not vanished with the morning. It remained above me, larger than ever, looming over the red sun like a wound in the heavens. I tasted the water. It was still sweet. I was still in Azabeth's realm. My hunger was still there, too. It had not weakened. It had grown. But now, it did not make me helpless. It gave me strength. It gave me purpose. It burned inside me like a second heart. I looked down and saw the orange-red lights beneath the surface. Azabeth had opened its enormous mouth again. The gate to the graveyard of swallowed men was waiting below me. Then bodies began to rise. At first, I thought they were strangers. Pale shapes floated upward from the depths and broke the surface around me. Then one turned in the water, and I knew his face. A crewman from my ship, then another, then another. They drifted around me, dead but untouched by rot, their eyes wide, their mouths open. Men I had spoken with, men I had shared meals with, men who had screamed in the dark when the ship struck whatever should not have been there. My stomach cramped so hard, I nearly cried out. Finally, I could eat. The first bite should have filled me with horror. It should have broken whatever was left of my mind. Instead, the tearing of flesh and the cracking of bones sounded like music. I fed on the bodies of my fellow men beneath the red sun and the watching sign of Azabeth. I ate until my hands were slick and my mouth was full and my stomach stretched. And still, the hunger remained. I do not know how long I stayed there. I do not know when the red left the sun. I do not know when the constellation faded from the day sky. I do not know when the sweet lake became the salt sea again, alive with wind and waves. I only know that at some point, I returned to the world of men. The sun no longer bothered me. Its heat could not reach whatever cold thing had settled inside my bones. The waves rocked me. The wind touched my face. Time lost all meaning. I floated and waited, knowing without knowing why that I would not die there. Then I saw sails on the horizon. A ship. Somehow, I knew it would find me. I knew the crew would pull me aboard. I say they would collect me, not rescue me, because rescue was no longer possible. I was beyond rescue, beyond fear, beyond salvation. All that remained was hunger. That hunger was Azabeth's gift, his mark, his blessing. I would carry it into the world of men. I would bring his hunger to warm homes, crowded ports, bright cities, and safe beds. I would feed, and through me, so would he. One day soon, his constellation will rise over the entire world. One day the sun will turn red again. One day all salt will be washed from the sea. One day the sky will hold no stars except the signs of Azabeth and his brethren. Only then will my hunger finally be satisfied. Story 3. The thing I hate most about blood is not the smell. It is not even the sight of it. After enough years in my line of work, you stop caring about those things. The smell becomes part of the air. The color becomes part of the room. The screams, the shaking, the pleading, all of it turns into background noise if you are disciplined enough. No, the thing I hate most about blood is how hard it sticks to everything. Everyone knows the simple version. Red blood on a white shirt is a nightmare. Good luck getting that stain out without ruining the fabric. Carpet is even worse. Curtains, towels, bed sheets, couch cushions, jackets, anything with fibers in it, really. Blood goes in, holds on, and refuses to leave. You can scrub for hours, and even when the red is gone, something of it still remains. A shadow, a smell, a little brown memory of what happened. Metal is different, but not better. Leave blood on metal long enough, and it starts to rust like crazy. It eats into the surface. It stains tools that were once clean. It ruins expensive instruments. It makes the whole room look careless. And if there is one thing I cannot stand, it is carelessness. That is why I hate this job sometimes. Actually, that is not true. I hate this job most of the time. But usually, the reasons are moral, not practical. Morality is heavy, but you can learn to push it down. You can drown it under money, contracts, legal wording, and the soft voices of important people telling you that everything is necessary. Blood on tile, though? Blood in the seams of equipment? Blood under the wheels of a table? That is personal. That is an insult to the work. People with money are not going to sit around waiting for an organ. That is the part most decent people pretend they do not understand. They act like the world is fair. They talk about waiting lists, donors, medical ethics, emergency care, and all those pretty little ideas hospitals put in pamphlets. But the people at the top do not live by pamphlets. They live by results. If a billionaire needs a liver, he does not wait behind a schoolteacher. If a senator's wife needs a heart, she does not pray and hope her name comes up in time. If someone has enough money and no legal match can be found, someone like us finds a match another way. That is where the renting idea came from. It was almost elegant in the beginning. At least that is what the partners said. Why force a client to buy when they could rent? Some people only needed a temporary replacement while their own body recovered. Some needed help for a year or two. Some simply wanted to keep living long enough for a better option to appear. It gave the company flexibility. It made clients feel hopeful. It made the numbers look beautiful. Of course, rented property has rules. Missed payments, late fees, breach of contract. Repossession, that is where my job comes in. I am a night surgeon. Sometimes I get to put the organs in. Those are the clean nights, the bright nights, in their own dark way. The client lies still under the lights, wrapped in expensive sheets, with their lawyers and family members waiting nearby. The organ arrives chilled, labeled, cleared through our private system, and I do what I was trained to do. I open. I remove what has failed. I place what has been promised. I close. I wash my hands. By morning, I am a hero. The client breathes again. Their loved ones cry with joy. The account clears. Everyone thanks me. Those nights bring praise. Quiet praise, of course. Private praise. The kind that comes in sealed envelopes, expensive bottles, and handshakes from men who never use their real names. Other nights, I help repossess. That word still makes people uncomfortable, even inside the organization. They prefer softer language. Retrieval, recovery, asset return, contract enforcement. But I do not have patience for soft language. We take back what was leased. Simple as that. It is not like I am the repo guy. That would be Grant. Grant is nowhere near my department, and thank God for that. Grant is the one who brings them in. He finds them when they run. He handles the screaming, the locked doors, the family interference, the panic, the bad decisions. He does the work that keeps my hands, at least technically, cleaner than his. Still, Grant is a ghoul. I do not use that word lightly. There is a way to do ugly work with control. There is a way to handle a body like it still matters, even if the person inside it no longer has any value to the contract. Grant does not understand that. Grant likes the chase. He likes fear. He likes dragging people through back doors and dropping them on my table like spoiled meat. He laughs too much. He breathes too hard. He carries cheap blades like a man who learned anatomy from horror movies. Either way, repossession is not our first step. People always imagine we move straight to violence. That is not true. There are notices, late fees, payment plans, liens, threats written in very professional language. The company has whole departments built around giving clients one last chance, then another. Then one more after that. It is better for everyone if they pay. It keeps the paperwork clean. It keeps the clients quiet. It keeps people like Grant in the background where they belong. Courts can be difficult sometimes, depending on the state and how much the client's family decides to cry in public. But most clients agree before things reach that point. They sign the papers. They understand the terms. They know what happens if they fail to pay. It is always better than Grant. Now, I will admit, there are certain parts of my end of the process that some people might consider untoward. That is the polite word. Untoward, it is a good word because it sounds smaller than what it means. For example, I can use a paralytic. That keeps the body still. It makes the work safer and cleaner. But most painkillers damage the product, and the product is the only reason the client is on my table in the first place. Some sedatives interfere with tissue quality. Some drugs cause problems during preservation. Some make the blood pressure behave in ways I do not like. So yes, sometimes the client is aware. Not always, but sometimes. There is also the matter of collateral organs. Fine print covers most of that. Very few bodies are clean systems. Remove one rented piece, and others may fail along with it. A client who leases a heart, a kidney, or a lung cannot be shocked when losing that organ causes additional complications. Our contracts are very clear if anyone bothers to read them. No guarantees of survival after repossession. No guarantee of comfort. No guarantee that non-leased tissue will remain viable during recovery. Fine print is a wonderful thing. People hate it until it protects them. Or protects me. Damn it. Grant just dragged in another one. I heard him before I saw him. Heavy boots in the hallway. Something wet scraping over the floor. His breathing, his stupid little whistle. The kind of whistle a man makes when he thinks he has done a good job. Then the double doors swung open, and there he was, pulling the client in by one arm. Butcher, that was the only word for him. The woman was still alive, though barely. Her hair was stuck to her face. One shoe was gone. There was mud on her legs and dirt under her fingernails. That means she had tried to claw at the ground while he dragged her. He had not even bothered with a transport sheet. He had not used straps. He had not covered her. He had simply grabbed the product and hauled it inside like a sack from a slaughterhouse. I looked at him. I looked at the damage. I looked at the floor behind him. How the hell am I supposed to get something usable out of that? I asked. Grant shrugged. She kept trying to crawl away, he said. That was his excuse. She kept trying to crawl away. If I had it my way, Grant would be classified as what he truly is, a serial killer with a paycheck. But I suppose the company thinks he is useful. At least in his current position, his habits are pointed toward something constructive. That is probably what the directors tell themselves. Better here than out there. Better under contract than in an alley. Better controlled than free. I do not know if I agree. Still, he had brought her in, and the organ inside her was ours. Work is work. I will add one more personal annoyance, because apparently I am the only person in this organization who values a clean operating suite. Could someone please give Grant a note to use a bag when moving product? A proper transport bag. A sealed one. We have them for a reason. They are not decoration. They are not optional. It took me 3 hours of scrubbing after that recovery to get the suite back into operation. 3 hours. Do you know how embarrassing that is? Imagine my next client being wheeled in and seeing a streak on the floor. Imagine them noticing the smell. Imagine them asking whether the blood in the room belonged to the last person on the table. What would I say? That it was not mine? That it was Grant's mess? That I am actually a professional, but the company insists on using a wild animal to collect unpaid organs? No, that would not do. I do not botch my work. I am a damn good surgeon. There are very few things left in this world that I take pride in, but my hands are one of them. I know exactly where to cut, how deep to go, when to slow down, when to move quickly, and when to stop. I know the difference between damage and necessary trauma. I know how to make a seam disappear. I know how to keep a client alive long enough to become useful, or dead, only when death is the efficient result. Grant does not know any of that. Also, while we are discussing his many failures, can Grant wipe his shoes before coming in? Mud in the hallway is not a good look. Mud means outdoors. Outdoors means witnesses, rainwater, bacteria, loose gravel, dead leaves, and whatever else clings to the bottom of his boots. Mud in my hallway means someone has to clean it. That someone is never Grant. I should make a formal complaint. Of course, I will not. Grant scares the junior staff, and the directors like that. Fear is cheaper than training. Mr. Primrose is pleased with the results. That should have made me happy. A pleased client usually means a clean invoice, a nice note from administration, and maybe a bonus if the client is important enough. Misty, Primrose is very important. Not famous, exactly. The wealthy are not always famous. Some of them are smart enough to hide their names behind companies, trusts, foundations, and friends who take phone calls for them. He came to us with a strange request. Not a standard replacement. Not a failing liver. Not a rented kidney. Not a heart that had to keep beating a few more years. No, mister. Primrose wanted augmentation. That was new territory for me. I had done repairs. I had done replacements. I had done emergency transfers under conditions that would make a normal hospital board faint. But augmentation was different. This was not about survival. This was not about giving the body what it needed. This was about giving the body more than it was ever supposed to have. The client called it his dessert stomach. Those were his exact words. He said it with a laugh, as though he were ordering a second kitchen for his vacation home. A dessert stomach. An additional chamber. A private, internal luxury. A biological indulgence for a man whose hunger had outgrown ordinary anatomy. His gluttony disgusts me, and I say that as a man who has removed organs from living debtors. There is something uniquely vile about a person who looks at the human body and thinks, I need extra space for pleasure, not to live, not to breathe, not to see another sunrise, just to consume more. Still, he paid, or at least we thought he did. Mr. Primrose sat under the lights, soft and pale, with rings on his fingers and sweat shining on his forehead. He smiled through the consultation like a child waiting for a birthday cake. He asked foolish questions. He wanted to know if he would feel full in two places. He wanted to know whether certain foods would go to the new chamber first. He wanted to know if it would make him unique. I told him it would make him functional. That was all I was willing to give him. The operation itself was fine. Better than fine, if I am being honest. It was one of my finest pieces of work. The connections were delicate. The placement required patience. The body resisted the change at first, as bodies do, but I guided it. I made room. I shaped the tissue around the addition. I closed with care. He woke pleased, too pleased. He kept touching his abdomen with both hands, laughing softly like he had been given a secret prize. He asked to see the incision. I let him. He smiled at it. That annoyed me, because I could still see the seam. A normal client would not notice. A normal surgeon might even call it excellent. But I saw it. I could see where the skin pulled slightly. I could see one place where the sutures sat with less grace than I wanted. Mr. Primrose praised it anyway. It was like a 3-year-old complimenting Picasso on a doodle. Still, the problem was mine. I will need better sutures. Something that does not feel so fragile while I work. Something that holds without fighting me. Something smooth, strong, and almost invisible when the skin begins to heal. The company should approve the expense. If they do not, I will make them. This was my first augmentation instead of a standard replacement, and no matter how disgusting the client was, the work mattered. It opened doors, new procedures, new markets, new reasons for rich people to pay us obscene amounts of money to become more than human, or less than human, depending on your view. Mr. Primrose should have been more than happy with his new piece, his dessert stomach. Disgusting phrase. But he was the first client I had personally met who paid for his organ in full. No rental terms, no monthly structure, no late fees, no lien. Complete purchase, clean transfer. He even negotiated a death clause. If he died naturally, the company might let him keep it after death, provided his estate paid the storage and disposal fees. How selfish. But the customer is always right, as they say, except the customer was not right. The customer lied. How dare he? How dare he? Some of my finest work, and his check bounced. I have seen people try to escape payment. I have seen them beg, cry, hide assets, fake deaths, flee across state lines, and pretend they did not understand what they signed. But Mr. Primrose was different. He acted like a king. He smiled in my operating room. He praised my hands. He admired my work inside his own body. Then his payment failed. It was not a banking error. It was not a delay. It was fraud. The company confirmed it twice. Funds unavailable. Accounts moved. Guarantees worthless. His people stopped answering calls. His lawyer sent a letter written in that smug language lawyers use when they believe money can turn theft into negotiation. For the first time in my career, I had to reach out to Grant personally. I hated doing it. Grant sounded happy when he answered. Too happy. I could hear him chewing something on the other end of the line. I told him we had a repossession. High priority. Full recovery preferred. Client was enhanced, and the pieces needed to come back in good repair. He asked if the client would run. I said Mr. Primrose was too fat to run far. Grant laughed for almost 10 seconds. I nearly hung up. There was one problem with this job. Grant only had cleavers. Not literally, perhaps, but close enough. He owned knives, hooks, heavy tools, crude straps, and no patience. If I allowed him to handle Mr. Primrose alone, the dessert stomach would come back looking like butcher's scrap, and the heart might not come back at all. That would be unacceptable. The only good organs inside Mr. Primrose were the ones we had so generously provided or protected. If we were taking them back, I needed to be there. So I went with Grant. I do not often leave the suite for retrieval. It is beneath my role, and more importantly, it increases risk. But this was my work inside that man. My stitching, my placement, my design. I was not going to let Grant ruin it because he got excited. Mr. Primrose lived in a gated estate outside the city, behind tall walls and a security team that looked expensive but bored. Money makes people lazy. It teaches them that a locked gate is the same as safety. Grant proved otherwise in under 5 minutes. I will not describe every detail, not because it bothers me, but because it is tedious. A guard looked away at the wrong time. A side entrance had a code someone should have changed months ago. A camera feed went dark. Then we were inside. Mr. Primrose was in a private dining room. Of course he was. He sat at the end of a long table covered in plates. Meat, sauces, pastries, fruit, cream, wine, and things I did not bother to identify. He was eating slowly, almost lovingly. His shirt was open at the neck. His face was flushed. One hand rested over the place where I had done my work. He looked up when he saw us. For a moment, he did not understand. Then he saw Grant. Fear came quickly after that. I stepped forward and explained the situation. Calmly, professionally, payment had failed. Terms had been violated. The company was exercising its right to recover property. Mr. Primrose shouted. He threatened. He promised money. He said there had been a misunderstanding. He called me a criminal, which I found deeply rude. A man should not insult the artist who improved him. Grant wanted to handle him right there on the dining room floor. I refused. Too dirty. Too much food. Too many sharp table edges. Too much risk to the product. We moved him to a cleaner room nearby, though cleaner is a generous word. Rich people often live surrounded by expensive filth and call it comfort. The client struggled. He begged. He cursed. He promised twice the money, then 3 times. He said he would ruin us. He said he knew people. They all know people until the paralytic takes hold. I administered it myself. His body went still, but his eyes remained awake. That is always the moment when clients understand that fine print is real. Grant stood beside me, watching with unusual silence. Normally, he paces, he fidgets, he makes jokes. This time, he watched my hands. I worked quickly, not with panic, never with panic. Speed is only useful when it follows knowledge. I knew what I had built inside Mr. Primrose. I knew where the new tissue rested. I knew where I had joined it. I knew which path would cause the least damage and which movement would preserve the most value. The stomach came back clean. The heart followed. 4 minutes from full paralysis to recovery. Grant stared like he had witnessed magic. I will admit, that pleased me. Perhaps I have been too hard on him. Perhaps Grant is not only a brute. Perhaps beneath all that mud, blood, and stupid violence, there is curiosity. A crude kind of curiosity, yes, but still. He seemed truly intrigued by my work. Not just by the blood, not just by the fear, by the precision. He asked how I knew where to move first. I told him anatomy is a language, and most men never learn to read. He nodded as if that meant something to him. For a moment, I remembered my own youth, before the private suites, before the quiet money, before the company paid for my medical school, before people called me doctor in rooms that were not supposed to exist. I worked for ops back then, low in the structure, closer to the dirt, closer to Grant's world than I like to admit. I was younger, hungry, and far less polished. But even then, I was leagues ahead of him. Still, talent can be shaped. A dull blade can be sharpened. Grant may never be elegant. He may never understand the beauty of a perfect closure or the quiet satisfaction of a clean recovery. But he has steady hands when he chooses to use them. He has no fear. He does not flinch. And tonight, for the first time, I saw him watch instead of tear. In time, with discipline, Grant could make a fine surgeon. Or at least something close enough for the night shift. Story 4. I woke up in a place that was almost completely dark. There was just enough light for me to see what was in front of me, but not enough to understand where I was. The darkness was thick, like smoke without smell, pressing against everything around me. It swallowed the edges of the ground, the air, the sky, and whatever was supposed to be beyond the bench I was sitting on. At first, I thought I was dead. Then I felt the cold wood beneath my hands. I was sitting on a bench. Not just any bench. It was the same old bench where I had met her for the first time. The same bench where she had sat with a book in her lap and a rose tucked behind her ear. The same bench where I had pretended not to stare at her, even though I had been staring from the moment I saw her. The bench looked exactly the same. Old, cracked, slightly bent in the middle. The paint had peeled away in long, thin strips, and one side had a deep scratch near the armrest. I remembered that scratch. I remembered touching it the day we met, pretending to be interested in the wood while I tried to find the courage to speak to her. Now I was sitting there alone. There was a rose behind my ear. I did not remember putting it there. Beside me, on the bench, there was a gun. It rested close enough that I could reach it if I wanted to. The metal was dull under the weak light. It looked heavy. It looked patient. It looked like it had been waiting for me. I tried to move my hand, but I could barely lift my fingers. My body felt empty. Not tired exactly. Emptier than tired. Like everything inside me had been scraped out and replaced with cold sand. My arms did not feel like my arms. My legs were numb. My head hung forward, and the only reason I knew I was still breathing was because every breath hurt. The smell of blood was still in my nose. Not my blood, the blood of my companions, my friends, my brothers, the men who had eaten beside me, marched beside me, laughed beside me, and screamed beside me when everything fell apart. Their blood had soaked into the ground. It had stuck to my clothes. It had dried under my fingernails. Even here, in this strange, dark place, I could still smell it. But there was something stronger than that smell. Her voice. The memory of her last phone call was sharper than anything else. I could hear her as clearly as if she were sitting beside me. Weak, tired, trying to sound brave. She had told me not to worry. She had told me she was fine. She had told me to focus on my duty. But I had heard the pain behind her words. I had heard the fear she tried to hide. And I had not been there. I had been somewhere far away, holding a rifle, wearing a uniform, pretending I was strong because everyone expected me to be. I had been fighting for my country while she fought for every breath in a hospital bed. I closed my eyes. The darkness around me grew colder. Then footsteps came from somewhere ahead. Slow footsteps. Two figures stepped out of the shadows. One came from the left. He was dressed completely in black. His clothes looked like they had been cut from the same darkness around us. He carried a trident in one hand, its sharp points catching the faint light. His face was hidden, not by a mask exactly, but by a blank shadow where a face should have been. I could not see eyes, a mouth, or even skin. Just blackness. The other figure came from the right. He was made of white light, not fire, not lightning. Something softer, something bright enough to hurt my eyes, but gentle enough that I wanted to look at it. He had wings on his back, wide and clean and glowing at the edges. His face was smiling, but there was sadness in the smile. He looked like someone who had arrived too late and was pretending that everything could still be fixed. The figure in black stopped in front of me and pointed his trident toward the gun. "To end this pain," he said, "you must die." His voice was deep, dry, and empty. It sounded like old doors closing in a long hallway. The white one nodded slowly, though his smile did not fade. "Yes," he said, "it is true. The pain cannot continue like this." The black one turned toward him, almost pleased. "Then tell him." The white one looked at me. I did not know what to say. I did not even know if I could speak. The black one leaned closer. "Pick up the gun," he whispered. "Aim it at your head. One small movement, and all of it ends. No more pain. No more memories. No more hospital calls. No more bills. No more blood. No more guilt." The white one lifted a hand quickly. "No, no," he said. "If he has to go, why like this?" The black one slowly turned his hidden face toward him. The white one walked closer to me. He reached into the darkness beside the bench and pulled out my bag. My field bag. It looked dusty and old, like it had been carried through years of war, even though I had only dropped it hours ago. He set it on my lap. "Stand up," he said gently. "I can't," I whispered, though I did not know where the words came from. "You can," he said. "A soldier can always stand one more time." The black one made a tired sound and put one hand to his forehead. "Here we go." The white figure helped me up. His hands were warm, but they did not feel human. They felt like sunlight passing through water. He opened my bag and pulled out my field clothes, my jacket, my belt, my boots, my helmet. Piece by piece, he helped me put them on. The black figure watched with his trident in hand, shaking his head. If he has to die anyway, he muttered, why all this drama? The white one ignored him. He dusted off my shoulders and adjusted the collar of my uniform. Instead of ending your own life in this darkness, he said, it is better to die with honor. It is better to die as a martyr in the line of duty. That word struck me. Martyr, I had heard it so many times that it had almost stopped meaning anything. It was a word people used when they wanted pain to sound beautiful. When someone died, they said martyr. When someone's mother cried, they said martyr. When a wife became a widow, they said martyr. When a child grew up without a father, they said martyr. It was a clean word people placed over dirty wounds. The black one suddenly rushed forward and grabbed the gun. He tried to force it into my hands. Enough, he snapped. Stop dressing him like a parade statue. Let him finish it. His fingers were cold around my wrist. He pushed the gun into my palm, but my hand would not close. The gun slipped from my fingers and fell onto the bench. He picked it up again and shoved it back into my hand. Again, it slipped. Again, it fell. The white one laughed softly. He stood in front of me and threw autumn leaves into the air. I do not know where he got them. They appeared in his hands like small pieces of memory. Brown, red, yellow, and gold. He blew them toward me, and they circled around my face. The black one glared at him. What are you doing? Helping him remember, the white one said. Remember what? That life has seasons. The black one groaned and sat down beside me on the bench. He put an arm around my shoulders like an old friend, though his touch made my bones feel cold. He picked up the gun again and tried to guide my fingers around it. Come on, he said, almost kindly now. You know you want to rest. Everyone is gone. She is gone. Your friends are gone. Your duty is done. Your country will call you brave for 1 week and forget your name by the next. Why stay? The white one sat down on my other side. No, he said, smiling. He will not hold it. The black one looked over me at him. You are very annoying. The white one reached into his glowing robe and pulled out a small emblem. It was the emblem of my country. He pinned it carefully to my jacket. Then he placed a hand over it, as if blessing it. The black one sighed, then picked up a pair of black sunglasses from nowhere and placed them over my eyes. There, he said. Now he looked serious. I sat between them like a mannequin. The rose behind my ear brushed against my cheek. The gun lay between my hands. My uniform felt heavy. The emblem on my chest felt heavier. For a while, none of us moved. Then, finally, words came out of my mouth. What is going on here? Both figures froze. The white one's mouth opened wide. The black one's hidden face leaned forward. He spoke, the white one said, sounding almost proud. The black one pointed at me. About time. What am I doing here? I asked. The black one leaned back. You were about to end your life. Remember? The white one quickly shook his head. No, you were about to sacrifice yourself for your country. Right? For the country, I said. My voice sounded far away. For the country, the words cracked in my mouth. Tears began to fall from my eyes. I did not feel them at first. I only noticed when they reached my lips and tasted salty. My gaze dropped toward the gun again. The black one noticed. Yes, he said softly. That is it. Pick it up. End the pain. The white one stood up fast. No, A soldier lives for his country. A soldier dies for his country. That is the way. The black one shoved the gun into my hands again. This time, my fingers closed around it. The white one stopped smiling. I raised it with shaking hands. The world around me went silent. Even the darkness seemed to hold its breath. The white figure closed his eyes. The black figure leaned closer. Waiting, I pressed the trigger. But no bullet came out. Instead, paper notes burst from the gun like a strange, ugly rain. Money, bills, receipts, loan papers, medical slips. They flew into the air and fell all around us, landing on the bench, on my boots, on my lap, on the ground. Some stuck to my uniform. Some brushed against the rose behind my ear. One landed on the white figure's glowing shoulder. He opened his eyes. "What is this?" he whispered. The black one began to laugh. Not a loud laugh at first, just a small sound. Then it grew until he was bent forward, shaking with it. "For the country, you said, right?" he said to the white one. The white one looked hurt. "But you were fighting for your country." I stared at the paper in my hands. I shook my head. "I fought for my country," I said slowly. "But every paycheck I earned already belonged to her." The white one looked away. "What nonsense," he muttered. But it was not nonsense. Every month, the money came. And every month, it was already gone before I touched it. Hospital bills, medicine, tests, borrowed money, promises, hope purchased in small amounts, and paid for with everything I had. I had worn my uniform for my country, yes, I had carried my rifle for my brothers, yes, but every breath I took, every dangerous step I made, every extra duty I accepted, had another reason behind it. Her, the black one, wiped imaginary tears from his hidden face. "Now, you really should just die." "Wait," the white one said suddenly. The black one groaned. "What now?" The white figure reached into his own chest. His fingers disappeared into the light, and when he pulled them out again, he held an apple. It was red and perfect, too perfect to be real. Its skin shone like polished glass. "Since you are about to take this step anyway," he said, "why not have something sweet first?" He held the apple out to me. I looked at it. "Eat it," the white one said. "Why?" He smiled sadly. "Do you not want to see your wife again?" My fingers tightened. The black one grew quiet. "She is already gone," I said. "And if you could see her one last time?" the white one asked. I stared at the apple for a long moment. Then I took it. It felt warm in my hand, like it had been sitting in sunlight. I lifted it to my mouth and took a bite. The world vanished. The bench disappeared beneath me. The darkness broke apart like old glass. The black figure, the white figure, the gun, the papers, all of them were swept away. I was standing beneath a sky painted in 3 colors. Saffron, white, green. The colors stretched from one end of the sky to the other, soft at first, then bright, then endless. Mountains rose across the horizon, wearing those same colors like a living flag. Their peaks glowed under the strange sky. Rivers flowed below them, shining like ribbons of saffron, white and green. The wind moved through fields that bent and shimmered with the colors of my country. For the first time in a long time, I smiled. It was beautiful, not the beauty from speeches, not the beauty from songs played on national days. This was deeper. It felt like home before the shouting, before the blood, before the funerals, before all the words people used to turn pain into pride. I took one step forward. Then numbers appeared in the sky. 12,500, 48,000, 3,020,000. At first, they floated like stars. Then more appeared. 8,700, 62,000, 1,010,000. They multiplied until the sky was full of them. Numbers above me, numbers beside the mountains, numbers reflected in the rivers, numbers falling through the light like ash. At first, they meant nothing. Then I recognized the first one, a hospital bill. The second one, medicine costs. The third, money borrowed from relatives. The fourth, a test we could not afford but had no choice but to get. The fifth, a loan I promised to repay. Every number carried a memory. Every memory carried her face. I saw her in the hospital bed, smiling at me through pain because she did not want me to worry. I saw her thin hands folded over a blanket. I saw the way she turned her face away when she cried so I would not see. I saw myself standing outside the ward, pretending to be strong while I counted money in my head. The mountains of my country stood behind me. My wife stood ahead of me. She was far away, standing in the middle of a field of white light. She looked healthy, young, like the first day I met her on the bench. She had a rose behind her ear. She smiled. I ran toward her. At first, the ground was soft under my feet. The air smelled like rain and flowers. The colors of the sky moved around us like flags in slow wind. I thought I could reach her. I thought maybe this was the mercy the white figure had promised. But with every step, the numbers rose from the ground like walls. 12,500 stood in front of me, tall as a door. I climbed over it. 48,000 rose behind it, wider and sharper. I pushed through it. Then 3,020,000 appeared, high as a building, blocking the view of her face. I slammed my hands against it. The number was not made of paper or light. It was hard, cold, heavy. I climbed until my fingers hurt. I pulled myself over and fell on the other side. More numbers appeared. Behind me, voices echoed from the tricolored mountains. For the country, for the nation, for duty. The voices were powerful. Proud, familiar, ahead of me, my wife smiled. I kept running. The numbers kept growing. They rose like walls, then towers, then mountains of their own. Every promise I had made became a barrier. Every bill I could not pay became a gate. Every month I had survived by borrowing from one person to pay another became a chain around my feet. The voices behind me grew louder. For the country, for the nation, for duty. My wife's voice came from ahead. Not loud, just clear. You came back late, she said. I stopped. The sky trembled. I tried, I whispered. I know, she said. The numbers moved around her like shadows. I fought, I said. I did everything I could. I know. I loved my country. I know. I loved you too. Her smile broke my heart. I know. Then I understood. I had never fought for only one thing. People wanted life to be simple. They wanted a soldier to belong fully to the flag or fully to his family. They wanted sacrifice to have one clean meaning. They wanted the dead to be heroes and the living to be strong. But life had never been that simple. I loved my country. But every time I marched forward, I carried her with me. Every time I picked up my rifle, I saw her hospital bed. Every time I walked into danger, I heard the machine beside her breathing for her. Every time someone shouted about duty, I thought about money. Every time someone called me brave, I felt afraid. The flag was on my shoulder. Her life was in my heart. And somewhere between those two things, I had lost myself. I started running again. But the numbers became too tall. She grew farther away. The mountains grew quieter. The sky filled with figures I could never repay. I screamed her name. She raised one hand. I reached for her. Then both my wife and the mountains faded together. The colors drained from the sky. The numbers fell like dead leaves, and everything went black again. I heard the voices before I opened my eyes. The white one sounded disappointed. "Let us get out of here," he said. "He is boring us." The black one snorted. If we were allowed to kill people ourselves, I would have killed him long ago. Their footsteps moved away from me. One set was soft, like light leaving a room. The other was heavy, like stones dragged across the ground. Then they both vanished. When my eyes opened, I was back on the bench. My head was spinning. My mouth tasted like apple and blood. The darkness was still there, but it seemed thinner now. The rose was still behind my ear. My uniform still pressed against my skin. The emblem of my country was still pinned to my chest. On one side of me lay the gun. On the other side lay the apple, with one bite missing. I stared at both of them. For a long time, I did not move. There was no black figure telling me to end the pain. There was no white figure telling me to become a martyr. There was no wife in the distance, no mountains, no voices, no numbers in the sky, just the bench, the gun, the apple, and me. For the first time, there was no one left to tell me what I had fought for. And that was the most frightening thing of all. Story 5. I used to believe the worst part of my life was already behind me. Back then, the worst part had a name. Chicago, divorce, debt, cold mornings, in a half-empty apartment. Boxes stacked near the door because I could not decide what to keep and what to throw away. A phone that rang only when someone wanted money from me. A bed that felt too big because the person who used to sleep beside me was gone. Memories that followed me from room to room like smoke. So when I left Chicago, I told myself I was not running away. I told myself I was starting over. I packed what was left of my life into my old car and drove south and east, away from the traffic, away from the noise, away from the apartment building where every hallway still smelled like old food and regret. I wanted quiet. I wanted simple. I wanted to wake up in the morning, drink black coffee on a porch, go to work, come home tired, and sleep without dreams. That was all. I was just an ordinary guy looking for a second chance. I found a small town in Ohio called Riverside. It was the kind of place people in big cities talk about when they say they want peace. It had one main street, one grocery store, a diner with cracked red seats, a small police station, and a church bell that rang every Sunday morning. There were trees everywhere. In the fall, they turned red and orange and gold, and when the wind moved through them, the whole town looked like it was slowly burning. I bought an old wooden cabin on the edge of the woods for a price that seemed almost too good to be true. It needed work, but I did not mind. The roof was old, the floorboards creaked, and the paint outside was peeling. But it was mine. It sat near the trees, away from neighbors, with a narrow dirt path leading to the back and a porch that faced the road. When I first stood in front of it, holding the keys in my hand, I smiled for the first time in months. "This is where I start fresh," I said out loud. I meant it. I had a job lined up at a local factory. The pay was not amazing, but it was steady. After everything I had been through, steady sounded like heaven. I imagined myself becoming one of those quiet men you see in small towns. The kind who wake up early, work hard, keep to themselves, and do not ask too much from life. I wanted a clean slate. Instead, I found something worse than anything I had left behind. And the man I thought was my first friend in that town was the reason my new life became a living hell. I first met John on a cold afternoon in October. I was driving along a winding Ohio highway in my old car, the heater blowing weak air against the windshield. The sky was gray, and the sun was already sinking behind the low hills. The trees on both sides of the road were losing their leaves. Red leaves spun across the pavement and stuck to the wet shoulder. Some of them were so dark they looked like frozen blood. The road was almost empty. For miles, I saw nothing but woods, fields, and the occasional farmhouse set far back from the road. It gave me the feeling I had been chasing for years. Freedom, space, silence. It felt like I had stepped into the version of America I used to dream about when I was sitting in traffic in Chicago, gripping the steering wheel and wondering how my life had become so small. I stopped at an old gas station near the side of the highway to fill up and get a hot coffee. It was the kind of place that looked like it had not changed since the 1980s. The pumps were old. The sign flickered. A faded American flag hung near the door, snapping in the wind. That was where I met John. He was standing near a dark pickup truck with its hood open. He looked like he was in his 40s, maybe a little older. He wore a worn leather jacket, faded jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low over his forehead. He had a rough face, but not an unfriendly one. When he saw me looking, he gave a tired smile and shook his head like a man who had just had a bad day. Truck picked the perfect time to die, he said. His accent was local. Calm, easy, he talked the way people talk when they have nowhere urgent to be. He said he was trying to get into Riverside, but his truck had broken down, and the tow service would take hours. I do not know why I trusted him so quickly. Maybe I was lonely. Maybe I wanted my first act in this new town to be a good one. Maybe I just wanted to believe people were decent. We talked for a few minutes. He asked where I was headed. I told him I had just moved to Riverside and was starting a job at the factory. He nodded and said he knew the place. He talked about football, gas prices, the economy, and how small towns were not what they used to be. Everything about him seemed normal, so I offered him a ride. That one decision changed everything. For the next hour, John sat in my passenger seat and talked like we had known each other for years. He asked about Chicago. I told him a little about the divorce, not too much, but enough for him to understand that I was trying to leave something behind. He listened carefully. He did not interrupt. He made a few jokes, and I laughed for the first time that day. He told me he had lived around Riverside for a long time. He said he had worked odd jobs, spent some time in the military, lost people, made mistakes. He spoke like a man who had been beaten down by life, but had kept walking anyway. I understood that feeling. By the time we reached town, I felt like maybe I had made a friend. I drove him to my new cabin because I had some boxes in the back seat and trunk. He offered to help me carry them inside. I did not see any reason to say no. He lifted boxes, joked about how heavy my books were, and whistled when he saw the inside of the cabin. Old place, he said, but it has bones. I laughed and told him that was what I was hoping. He stayed for maybe 20 minutes. Then he said he had someone to call about his truck and started walking back toward town. Before he left, I gave him my phone number. Thanks again, he said. Not many people stop these days. No problem, I told him. I'm new here. Figured I should start with some good karma. He smiled at that. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in months. No dreams, no memories, no waking up at 3 in the morning thinking about bills or lawyers or my ex-wife's voice. Just sleep. But near dawn, something woke me. At first, I did not know what it was. I lay still in bed, staring at the dark ceiling, listening. Then I heard it again. A faint sound above me. Footsteps. Slow. Light. Moving across the roof. I held my breath. The cabin was surrounded by trees, so I told myself it was probably a squirrel or a raccoon. Maybe the wind had knocked a branch against the roof. Old houses made strange sounds. I knew that. I rolled over and forced myself back to sleep. The next morning, I went into the kitchen and stopped. The back door was slightly open. Not wide open, just cracked a little, enough to let cold air slip inside. I stood there staring at it, trying to remember if I had locked it the night before. I was sure I had. I always checked locks. Years of city living had trained that into me. Near the door, there was a small spot of mud on the floor. I stared at that, too. For a few seconds, a cold feeling moved through me. Then I shook it off. Maybe I had tracked it in myself. Maybe the door had not latched properly. Maybe this old house had drafts and loose frames and all kinds of little problems I did not know about yet. I closed the door, locked it, and told myself not to be paranoid. That day, I unpacked boxes, called the factory to confirm my start date, and tried to make the place feel like home. I put dishes in the cabinets. I made the bed properly. I set my coffee maker on the counter. I found a place for my old framed photos, though I kept the ones from my marriage turned face down inside a drawer. That evening, I went into town and stopped at the local pub. I wanted to get a feel for Riverside. The place smelled like fried food, beer, and old wood. A few men sat at the bar watching a game. A woman behind the counter called everyone honey. People were friendly enough. When they found out I was new, they asked where I came from. When I said Chicago, a few of them laughed and told me I would sleep better out here. Someone mentioned drifters in the woods. Another person said there were old hunting trails, abandoned shacks, and people passing through sometimes. But don't let that scare you, the bartender said. Most of those stories are just small-town nonsense. Everyone agreed. Just rumors. Just stories. When I got back to the cabin, I found my coffee mug from that morning sitting on the kitchen table. Clean, washed, turned, upside down. I stood in the doorway and looked at it for a long time. I remembered leaving it in the sink. At least I thought I did. A chill moved across my back, but I blamed myself. I had been tired. I had a lot on my mind. Maybe I washed it before leaving and forgot. People forget small things all the time. The next day, John called. He asked how I was settling in. His voice sounded warm and normal. I felt silly for being relieved, but I was. The cabin had started feeling too quiet, and hearing a familiar voice helped. I invited him over for dinner as a thank you for helping me move the boxes. He came by that evening with a six-pack and a bag of chips. I made cheap steaks in a pan and some canned green beans. We sat at the small kitchen table and talked for hours. He told me more about his life. He said he had lost his family in an accident. He said he had trouble staying in one place after that. He spoke with sadness, but not in a way that felt fake. I told him more about myself than I should have. I told him about the divorce, about the debt, about how I felt like I had failed at everything. He nodded like he understood every word. After dinner, we stepped outside. The air was cold and smelled like wet leaves. John looked around the porch and then said, "You should keep a spare key somewhere safer." I turned to him. "What?" He pointed toward the planter near the steps. "Under there," he said. "Obvious place. Everyone checks there." My stomach tightened. I had placed the spare key under that planter the day before. I had never told him. For a moment, I just stared at him. He must have noticed my expression because he laughed and raised both hands. "Relax," he said. "I used to do maintenance work. People always put keys under planters, or rocks, or above the door frame. Bad habit. That made sense. At least, it almost did." I laughed with him, but later that night, after he left, I moved the spare key into a kitchen drawer. Over the next few days, strange things started happening more often. At first, they were small enough to explain away. I would come home and find a chair pulled slightly away from the table. I would notice a cabinet door open that I thought I had closed. Food disappeared from the fridge. Not a lot. Just enough to make me wonder. A slice of cheese. Half a sandwich. A bottle of water. Leftovers I was sure I had saved. Sometimes, when I walked into the bedroom, I smelled cheap cigar smoke. I did not smoke. I searched the house and found nothing. No one under the bed. No one in the closets. No broken windows. No signs of forced entry. I called the police once. The officer on the phone was polite, but not very concerned. He said it was probably animals. Old cabins had gaps. Raccoons were smart. Possums could get into places you would not expect. He suggested I check the crawl spaces and seal any openings. I wanted to believe him. I had started working nights at the factory by then. My shift ended around 2 in the morning. Every night, I drove home through dark roads, exhausted and half numb, telling myself that everything was fine. The job was hard, but it kept my mind busy. I liked the noise of the machines. I liked the smell of oil and metal. I liked knowing exactly what I was supposed to do for 8 hours. But the cabin felt different when I came home in the dark. It no longer felt like a fresh start. It felt like something was waiting for me. By the second week, my unease had become fear. One night, I came home from work and found muddy footprints on the carpet. They began near the back door and led toward the hallway. They were bigger than mine. I stood frozen, still wearing my factory jacket, my lunch bag in one hand. The house was silent. The air smelled faintly of cigar smoke. I grabbed a kitchen knife and searched every room. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped it twice. Nothing. No one. Just the footprints. The next morning, I drove to Walmart and bought a cheap security camera. I installed it in the living room, pointed toward the hallway and kitchen. For the first night, I felt a little better. At least now I would know. But when I checked the footage after work, I saw only shadows. At 1:17 a.m., the camera showed darkness shifting near the edge of the hallway. A shape moved in the corner of the frame, but it was too blurry to understand. The camera glitched. The screen flickered. Then the room was empty again. I showed the footage to John when he visited later that day. He looked serious for once. "Change the locks," he said. Today, he offered to help me check the house. We went room by room. He tested windows, looked at door frames, checked under sinks, and tapped on walls like he knew what he was doing. Then, he looked up at the ceiling in the hallway. "Did you know about that?" he asked. I followed his eyes. There was an attic hatch. I had seen it before, but I had assumed it was sealed or empty. The outline was faint. painted the same color as the ceiling. John pulled a chair under it and pushed the panel open. A stale smell came down. Dust, old wood. Smoke. We climbed up with flashlights. The attic was low and cramped, with beams running across the ceiling. Insulation lay in uneven patches. In one corner, we found an old blanket. Next to it were cigarette butts. My throat went dry. John crouched beside them and shone his flashlight around. Probably from the previous owner, he said. Why would the previous owner sleep in the attic? He shrugged. Maybe kids, maybe workers, maybe someone came in here before you bought the place. He said it calmly, but I could tell he was tense. That night, I barely slept. Sometime after 3 in the morning, I woke to the sound of breathing. It was close, too close, slow and heavy, right beside my bed. I snapped on the lamp. The room was empty, but the smell of cigar smoke was so strong that my eyes watered. The next day, I checked my phone and found something even worse. Text messages from an unknown number had been deleted. I only saw them because one notification still remained on the screen. You're living my life now. I called the police again. This time, an officer named Mike came to the cabin. He was a broad man in his 50s with tired eyes and a calm voice. He looked around carefully. He checked the locks, the attic, and the muddy footprints I had not fully cleaned yet. He dusted a few spots and said there were fingerprints he could not identify right away. I think you should stay in a hotel for a few nights, he told me. I shook my head. I know that sounds stupid now. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was fear wearing the mask of pride. But I had lost so much already. My marriage, my money, my old home, my old life. This cabin was the first thing that had felt like mine in a long time. I'm not leaving, I said. This is my home. Officer Mike looked at me for a long moment. At least be careful, he said. A week after moving to Riverside, I had bought a gun legally. I never thought I would need it. Now I started sleeping with it beside me. John began visiting almost every day. At first, I was grateful. He brought food. He brought coffee. He stayed for hours, talking with me so I would not feel alone. He told me more stories about his past, about the military, about losing his family, about how grief could hollow out a man until he barely recognized himself. I felt safe around him. That was the worst part. I felt safe with the man who was destroying me. Little things began to bother me, though. He knew things. Small things. Too small to matter on their own, but strange when I added them together. He knew I drank my coffee black, even before I made coffee in front of him. He knew which side of the bed I slept on. He joked once about the color of my underwear, and when I asked what he meant, he laughed and said he was just guessing. He knew where I kept my work boots. He knew the sound my car made when it pulled into the driveway. I told myself he was observant. I told myself I was becoming paranoid. Then one night, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Not on the roof, not in the walls, inside the house. I opened my eyes and reached for the gun. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. I got out of bed and moved quietly toward the hall. The attic hatch was open. The panel hung down slightly, leaving a black square in the ceiling. I raised the gun and called out, "Who's there?" No answer. I pulled the chair under the hatch and climbed up. In the attic, my flashlight caught a shape on the floor. Someone was sleeping there. A person, wrapped in the old blanket. For one frozen second, I could not move. Then the person jerked upright and scrambled backward into the darkness. I lunged forward, but the attic was too low and too cluttered. My shoulder hit a beam. My flashlight fell. By the time I grabbed it again, the person was gone.